So my next project is this Realistic or Radio Shack LAB-440 direct drive fully automatic turntable. So I bought this on Facebook Marketplace for $40 and it seemed like an honest listing. Turntable's a bit dirty, so we'll get that cleaned up. But it said that it had two problems. First of all, that the hinges were broken. So in fact, these hinges, we'll look at the back of them, are not going to support the weight of the turntable's lid, and that it does not have sound on one of the two channels, which could be any number of things, but both of those things are fixable. So I thought this would be a good turntable to take a shot at repairing.
Because this is a product from Radio Shack, another resource we can use is the archive of their catalogs. Now, as a kid in the 70s and teenager in the 80s and young adult in the 90s, Radio Shack, of course, was everywhere. And then they went away. But we can look at their catalogs going all the way back to 1939 until they began to implode in the 2000s. So I found that the first catalog that the turntable appeared in was in 1982, and the last was in 1984. So this is the 1984 catalog. So, and it tells you here that this is a price drop from about $220 in the previous 2 years. So we'll take a look at that. So in 1982, the turntable would be $220. So let's see how much that would be today. $732. This is a pretty nice turntable, but I wouldn't pay $732 for it. But it gives you a sense of how much of their disposable income people were paying for things like this back in the 1980s. So in the 1984 catalog, it had gone down to $180. That's a more reasonable $550 or so, but still quite expensive. So Realistic was a brand that, even at the time, I thought was overpriced.
Another great resource to use is back issues of magazines, in particular back issues of Stereo Review, which was my favorite audio magazine when I was a teenager in the 1980s. So this website, worldradiohistory.com, has the complete archives of Stereo Review, as well as many other magazines, going way back. In the case of Stereo Review, all the way back to 1958, right up until 1999, when they became Sound and Vision magazine, which is still around. One of the neatest aspects of these are the buyer's guides. So the buyer's guide listed many of the products, if not all of the products available from all of the manufacturers in multiple categories for that year. So this is from 1983, and the ads are so fun to look at here too. So it's got all of these categories, and just scroll to the right page that you want. This is a PDF that you can download. So you can go to a specific year's buyer's guide, but you can also search. And the search function works really well, even though these are PDFs. So click search, and I've tried this before, so I know I want to search for Realistic LAB-440 with no hyphen. So it found that page from the 1983 buyer's guide. So this is only one page, so if you wanted to look at the pages before and after this in an article or something, you'd want to go back and open that specific issue of the magazine. And click on this, and here's our turntable, which again was $220 in 1983. There's also an ad for the turntable from the pages of Stereo Review. This is after its price had been lowered, and that's our turntable. So back in the 80s, a lot of audiophiles looked down their noses at Realistic or Radio Shack components, part because we didn't really know who made them, although they were made by reputable manufacturers, in this case CEC, and I think they were relatively overpriced, but just the idea that you could get good quality audio equipment at a Radio Shack store in pretty much every town in the country is pretty amazing, and I'm sure helps to greatly expand the hobby back in the 1980s. And some of this equipment that's still around has appreciated in value. Certainly their Minima 7 speakers, which I have a pair of also, a good example of that, and are becoming collector's items. So that cleaned up rather nicely. The genuine wood grain plastic finish looks better with the platter off. I think we are going to be removing some screws, but yes, the hinges are blown out. So where the spring pushes against the plastic, it's broken in the same place on both of them. Now, interestingly enough, that is a part that is still available because many turntable manufacturers use the same parts. So I've seen these same hinges, here's a good one, on JVC, Sony, and Kenwood turntables. So it happens I have one good one already, so I'll have to buy another one, and then these hinges will hold up the lid. The seller of this turntable very honestly stated that there was a problem, specifically that one of the channels was out. So the signal path of the turntable is actually very, very simple. So you've got your stylus here, which is going to vibrate in the groove and transmit that up the cantilever and using the magnets to convert it to electrical energy. But from there, it's a straight path all the way out to the RCA cables that are at the back of the turntable. This particular turntable has a removable cartridge. So there's pins on the back of the cartridge. They connect to wires that connect to more pins that then connect to 4 more pins inside the tone arm. But those wires then go all the way back. They sometimes connect to like a junction inside, but then they connect directly to the RCA cables that come out the back with no processing or amplification or anything in between. So we should have continuity between the wiring on the cartridge and the RCA cables coming out the back. But the problem is, of course, the fault could be at any point along that signal path. We have to figure out where that fault is. So the fault could be in the cartridge itself, but for the time being, I'm going to eliminate that from the equation and focus on the wiring of the turntable. So I'm going to set my meter to audible continuity. So if there's a signal that goes all the way through, it will make a beeping sound. So I'm going to touch each of the pins inside the tone arm as I touch the RCA cables and see if we get continuity. So this middle here, this is the positive on the right channel, and then the negative. This is the positive on the left channel, and this is the negative. Positive right is good. Negative right is good. Positive left, I don't hear anything. Negative left, nothing. So that suggests that it's probably the left RCA cable, or at least the left channel somewhere along the signal path. So the next step is to go inside the turntable and see if we have continuity from the end of the tone arm to where the wires come out of the tone arm and are connected inside the turntable. I've got my turntable upside down. I've removed the platter. I've got it on my little padded bricks. I A little jack here. I'm going to remove the screws to open the base, so it looks like these around the perimeter here. And we've got a fiberboard base, which is not the best, but the Sanyo turntable turned out to be pretty well made regardless. So let's open this up. So I had to remove just 6 screws to get the base off. Wood screws, even the plinth here is made of wood or compressed wood. Let's take this off. Okay, here we go. It's actually the first wood plinth turntable I've worked on. As you can see, the wires come in from the tone arm here, these very fine wires that go the length of the tone arm, and they connect to this junction, and then the RCA cables connect right to it. So it's really, again, a direct signal path from the tone arm all the way out to the back of the turntable. So let's see if we have continuity between, again, those pins and here. And I'm going to do this off camera because it's going to be a little hard to shoot. Okay, so I tested the continuity from the tone arm to each of these wires here, the white, the blue, the red, the green, and they were all good. So from the end of the tone arm to here, they're good. Then I tested the continuity from where the RCA cables connect to their other ends. And if you remember, the white positive was the one that didn't work. And sure enough, it's the white positive. So it looks like if we change out the RCA cables on this turntable, we'll have fixed our signal problem. As luck would have it, I have this other nice quality RCA cable from another turntable. So we'll just desolder the old one and solder the new one in. Even the quality of these solder joints is impressive. Mine won't be that good. So continuity testing has indicated that replacing those RCA cables should fix our signal problem. So let's see how the turntable is working mechanically. So let's give it a start. Well, that looks really good. Let's try the cueing lever. Move it in a bit. It's even setting down slowly. That's great. We hit stop. It stops. This turntable works so well, I don't want to get too invasive with it, but I think I really need to deal with this deteriorating rubber block. It's just going to get worse and worse. So trying to figure out what to do about this, and one idea I had was to cut this off and put successively larger pieces of heat shrink tubing on it, and maybe just build it up into like a rubber, massive rubber that way. So I'm going to measure this and see if I can figure out how big I want it to be when I'm all done. The main part of the block came off more easily than I thought it would be, and more cleanly. So I'm trying to clean this, the shaft here of the tone arm. I'm going to use some Goo Gone and Q-tips, which works great for this kind of thing. And then work on building it up with heat shrink tubing to a thickness of about 5 millimeters. So I've got my first piece of heat shrink tubing on there and a heat shield. So let's see if we can shrink these down. So that seems to have worked. I was able to use actually the same size heat shrink tubing over and over again because it shrank down enough. I used, I think, a total about 3 different sizes, probably 6 or 7 layers, and created a new rubber block. Hopefully that will do the trick. I'm going to try to re-lubricate the motor by removing these 3 screws, or 3 nuts here, and pulling the motor out. Glad I did that, because not only did I get access to the motor and clean the shaft and the recess it goes into, but I can also see the underside of the cog that activates the automatic mechanism, and I can clean that from here too and re-lubricate that with some white grease. So now let's turn to the cartridge. So this is a Radio Shack Realistic R1000 EDT, which actually is a Shure M75, which is actually an excellent cartridge. And you can still obtain aftermarket styli that are pretty decent for this. My favorite place to look is a company called thevoiceofmusic.com. So they have styli for all kinds of different cartridges, some original, but also replacements made by third-party manufacturers. So I'm going to click on Needles Styli. Select cartridge brand is Shure. So I've found the easiest way to navigate this is to look for one that looks like yours and then click on the picture. So in doing this before, I know that the 760 is the model that we want. So here it lists all the different cartridges that it will fit. So it will fit the M75, which is the equivalent of our cartridge. And the best one that they have available is this one right here, the 4760 DED. This is a 3x7mm elliptical, tracking between 1 and 1.5 grams, so that's ideal for our low mass tone arm, and it's $28. So I was going to use this head shell from a different turntable to replace the one that was on this one because it has a broken finger lift, but look what I found. These shafts are not the same length, and this longer length shaft will not fit in this tone arm. So just to see if it would be feasible to replace the head shell, I went to eBay and searched for the name and model number of the turntable and got some interesting results for the same part, and it still has the cartridge attached to it, and it's only $45. So this is a possibility. Here's a listing for the turntable itself, $249. But even a broken one that isn't working properly is $159. So did pretty well for $40. Incidentally, also came across the hinges, which are again still readily available. So now I have the parts to complete this job. I have the replacement hinge, and this is such a nice turntable. Although I'm not going to keep it myself, I've decided that I'm going to give it to my niece. So I wanted to make it as good as it could possibly be. So I decided to get the replacement head shell with the intact finger lift. I put it into my watch list on eBay, and the seller offered me a better price, so I took it. But of course it needs a new stylus, so this is the excellent replacement stylus from VM Audio Enthusiasts. I've already tried this in the other cartridge on my primary turntable, my listening room, and it sounds fantastic. I think Shure cartridges are great in general. Sometimes replacement styli don't sound as good as original ones, but this is every bit as good as a Shure original one. So let's put this all together. And there we go. Everything's back together and working great. The cartridge, as I got it, was horribly misaligned. You can actually see it in the last video clip. So I've been basically sliding sideways through the grooves probably for decades because the screws were tight. So that's fixed. Has the new stylus on it. Sounds terrific. And I'm just so pleased with how this turntable's turned out, and I'm very eager to get it onto its new home.